Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to explore Mercury's retrograde through the sign of Virgo, which begins on the 23rd of August. I'm going to briefly outline to you how I'm going to structure the video. Mercury retrogrades have a quite unique symmetry. The actual event lasts around 23 days, but the whole process is 10 weeks, including the pre and post shadow periods. So I'm going to share that with you. But also Mercury rules the sign of Virgo. So what does Mercury in Virgo tell us? And what can we expect from the retrograde? Is it as negative as the legend tells us, or are there opportunities? I'm also going to share with you the event chart on the screen, which we can all collectively relate to, because there are other influences which are going to be very important during this process. Then there are two aspects, upcoming aspects, during the retrograde that I feel are particularly notable. One on the 4th of September with Jupiter, the second on the 6th is a cazimi. This is where, from our view on Earth, Mercury is sat in the disk of the Sun. Because of the retrograde, it's an inferior conjunction, and this is going to amplify the power of Mercury retrograde in Virgo, despite the fact that obviously the reputational implication is that it can cause niggles. So much to share with you. I will then go on and give you an idea of what we can expect from each of the 12 zodiac signs in terms of the Sun or the Ascendant. If you are new to my channel, thank you so much for joining us. This is very much a community. I do chat with any comments people leave and try to interact with as many as possible. Also, if you're a returning visitor, it's lovely to have you with me once more. I'd be honoured if you would subscribe if you've yet to do so, but please do like or share too. I'd just like to share with you a very special opportunity. Year 2023 is racing by and 24 speeding towards us. If you order your year 2024 personal horoscope forecast now, based on your personal birth data, I'll prepare the rest of year 2023 free of charge. Plus, you'll get 30% off and your character analysis report, your life roadmap, which will give you intimate understanding of the patterns that have played out in your life, but how you can work with them more effectively. And all of this gives you a fantastic amount of information to steer your future moves. Please see the link beneath this video for more. So Mercury retrograde begins on the 23rd of August at 7:59 and 16 seconds PM Universal Central Time at 21 degrees and 51 minutes. Now the actual retrograde goes on for 23 days through to the middle of September the 15th. But the whole process actually covers 10 weeks. The pre-retrograde shadow began on the 4th, and at that point Mercury was exactly 8 degrees. When we get to the 15th of September, guess what? Mercury is retreated back to that point, 8 degrees. And yet by the time we get to the end of September, Mercury has advanced back to where the retrograde begins at 23:51 minutes. So there's a wonderful symmetry to the way that this plays out. Now I feel that once Mercury retrograde ends in the middle of September, which coincidentally is also the time when the new moon occurs in the host sign of Virgo, that could be when lots of things that perhaps have caused some issues and snags can start to get resolved. But it may still take to the end of September, and at that point Uranus, the planet of innovation but also of disruption, forges another fantastic link to Mercury. So by approaching things in a fresh way, a different way, being open-minded, we may find some solutions to some of the things that may have caused some mischief earlier on. So what does Mercury in Virgo represent? Well, if someone has Mercury in Virgo, I think they have a great ability to analyse and be very precise and meticulous. So it's almost like arrowing in like a pin to a particular issue and really grappling with it in a very exacting way. So whether it's a surgeon, whether it's somebody who works in records, whether it's somebody who is doing machine work where you really have to concentrate as the cutting goes on, maybe someone who's a jeweler cutting those stones, someone who may work in the medical profession for sure, a tattooist would be very well advised to have Mercury in Virgo, that precision of getting that drawing onto a person's being in just the way that they want. Virgo in its archetype does have a reputation of being quite critical and sometimes a little bit pedantic, so that could be something that is going to show itself with Mercury going through this transition. But it's also important to understand why this is, because the sign of Virgo is all about the narrow part of the journey of the sun through the heavens. It's asking us to really zone in on how we can take the creativity and flair and charisma of the sun's passage through Leo and make it into something that is lasting. So taking that more creative strand and really coming up with something that's workable, has a tangible benefit, and it's going to be very practical and sustainable. And that's the thinking of Mercury and the element of Earth producing something that has a practical benefit. Now, the sign of Virgo is also very much about physical health, organisation, our everyday domestic sphere. It can be to do with aunts and uncles, also domestic pets. It can be to do with appointments, job applications, the actual process within the job. So the 10th house is very much to do with the career we're in. The 6th house is how we actually go about our role within that career. So we may have someone who has a particular title, but the processes they need to go through in a very neat and step-by-step and systematic way, that's very Virgo. So when Mercury is retrograde, all of those areas are going to come more sharply into focus. So it's important to just check up and see if we have got any routine appointments that may be due, whether it's for the dentist, maybe inoculation for our furry friends, maybe it's to do with our paperwork, digital or in old-fashioned form, that we just need to make sure is tidy, organised, up to date. So for example, if we're going to work, it's very important that we're not distracted from really concentrating on the role that we have to carry out. And it is hard with all the different media that assails us these days to completely hone in on what's essential. And Virgo energy is very different to, say, Sagittarius energy, which is the big picture, and therefore sometimes the small, seemingly dull tasks that we do need to do can be the things that we put off, you know, whether it's chores, a do-it-yourself situation where something is not quite working, a light bulb that's gone out that we haven't yet changed, ironing that needs to be done. But if we can control the flow of any of those intricate parts of our existence in a very precise way, we're going to push back the potential that Mercury retrograde can snag us. What we can't do is control everything else. So for example, if we order groceries online, the technology that comes from Mercury, 6th house is very much about food distribution. It's possible that despite our order going in and us paying for it, it may be that there are some items that are not available. And we need to just be aware of that and plan and have some contingencies. But also, you know, if we do work in any kind of environment where we have a line manager who tends to be a bit picky, the chances of that being amplified during this period is much greater. So I think what we could get is a bit of a clash between our desire to be free spirits, do what we want, check our phones, answer a message, just look at what the latest currency rates are to plan our vacation in advance. All these things are taking us away from really maintaining our gaze in that metronomic way that is perhaps expected of us. So distraction, I think, will be revealed. But also it could be that there are parts of our situation that we do need to take greater care with. So for me, there's a limitless amount of opportunity to understand more what goes into what we eat or what we cook in, because of all the different processes that go on. And so intensively processed food for me is a real no-no. But it's surprising how things can still sneak through. There's plastics apparently in tea bags and so forth. And maybe some of the chemistries we use or toiletries we use, what are some of the ingredients in those things? So the more exacting gaze of Mercury retrograde could actually teach us something that we didn't know. So it's very, very important that we don't just see Mercury retrograde as a potential for what can get snagged, delayed, and cause us frustration and irritation, which is certainly possible with this sixth house energy. It's important to see where we may use a greater amount of concentration to make some marginal gains to improve our situation. So, for example, if we're in a job that's not providing us with much personal satisfaction and we want to help someone, which is very Virgoan, a great time to apply for a job. So many people write to me and say, is it right that I shouldn't start a job when Mercury is retrograde? Well, if Mercury is going through its 10-week cycle 3 times a year as a minimum each year, that's 30 weeks. So we're talking about nearly 2/3 of the year when all of us should stop and do absolutely nothing until we wait for this colossal event to hurtle past us. It depends. Obviously, if Mercury retrograde is applying to a key position in your natal chart, it could be problematic. If you have Mercury retrograde in your natal chart, you may find that Mercury retrograde actually just brings out the best of you. It just exactly depends on the more serious astrology. But as a broad principle, I think it's important to try to use the energy of Mercury in its home zone of Virgo, second home zone after Gemini, to try to work in as concentrated way as possible to improve any part of our existence which is not running quite as well as it could. So going back to that dental appointment, if we've not found a dentist in our locality, or we've not been to the doctors for just a routine checkup on our bloods, this would be a great time to do it, because it could reveal some information where something might be slightly out of kilter that could be adjusted very, very quickly. But the only way we're going to find out about that is through information. So for example, you could have a hair test which gave you some idea of the balance of nutrients in your system. Could have a blood test and find out the same information. So any kind of deep dive into detail can benefit from Mercury's retrograde. So reset, re-examine, and regain more control over some parts of our existence which do seem a little unsexy, I will agree, but we can gain enormously from that. Now I'm just sharing on the screen now the solar event chart wheel. So this is so we can all relate to this with 0 degrees Aries, the vernal point, as being the ascendant essentially of where the zodiac begins. So that sees Mercury at 2151, but it's angling back to Uranus in a really constructive way. So Uranus is asking us to stay very open-minded about how we can use that attention to detail, as I said before, to refresh, to look at something in a new light that perhaps has been causing us some problems, or perhaps we can be quite ingenious about adapting something in a way which creates greater benefits to something that we already have. So that could be doing something around the house that just makes things work a little easier. We can also see that Mars is pretty close to Mercury, and Mars is actually opposed by Neptune. Now remember I said that the sign of Virgo, where of course the Sun is as well, it's just moved into Virgo earlier today. That is very much to do with the physical domain, the practical part of our existence, and Saturn and Neptune are in the more psychological area. So one of the things that I think is definitely going to happen over the next few weeks is we're being asked to try to integrate those two polarities, and it's something that frankly we find quite difficult to do. So if you find yourself being a bit low in energy and rather frustrated, well, it's pretty clear to see with Saturn in a direct opposition to the Sun that it would be no surprise if the next 23 days did create some frustration, and we could pile in and all blame it on Mercury retrograde. No, the Sun is opposed by the handbrake that is Saturn. Neptune, directly opposite Mars, that can really take away Mars's brio, that its desire to be very active and get stuck in. Mars in Virgo can be very sacrificing. It takes away some of its need for attention in its ego concept, and it wants to get stuck in and be physical. But with Neptune opposite, I wouldn't be overdoing the physical exercise. It needs to be well measured. You can also see the moon is opposite Uranus. The moon up there in Scorpio actually forges a really good link with the position of Mercury. You can see that that's a sextile, and Uranus in the trine, but the moon and Uranus are opposite, so that suggests around the 2nd and 8th houses that there could still be some more things coming out into the open around financial services, around the cost of living and so forth. And perhaps we're being all asked to ask more searching and at times provocative questions. So I think that just gives you a little bit of a flavour. We also have Jupiter in a square with Venus, and that's interesting because that can be very much about enjoying ourselves to the nth degree. Jupiter in Taurus doesn't like to say no to that extra glass of wine, and Venus, they're actually in a square for the first 3 weeks of September. That's really wanting to enjoy the good things to the nth degree, whereas all that energy in Virgo is asking us to throttle back a little bit, try to embrace a little bit more purity. So if you're someone who's very much into cleanses and detox, fantastic time to go for it, because with Neptune opposite Mars, Neptune can be very much the things that we absorb, build up in, the deep cells of our being. Mars very much of its rulership of Aries on the physical body, and of course Saturn may be the things that are deep rooted of a more psychological nature that we don't really want to look at. But of course if we get fitter or stronger, it gets easier to deal with any kind of emotional situation. So if you're very much into complementary medicine or healing, the next 23 days can be a marvellous time to check out some chiropractic, some reflexology, some shiatsu, whatever it is that attracts you. A very good time to try to integrate the body in a more holistic way. So please do see Mercury retrograde in Virgo as a time to be a little bit more self-critical about ourselves, take a bit more responsibility about the things we're putting off, understand that there may be some irritating little tasks and errands that we do need to grapple with, and if we don't, it could be, particularly in the professional situation, that someone can start to be a little bit too interested in what we're not doing as they see it in quite as an efficient way as we might. And I have to say, if you do work in an environment where it is a bit catty, there is a lot of politics, that may be something that you won't enjoy over the next few weeks. But Mercury retrograde there is saying, look, take this opportunity to push yourself, to try to scrutinise the situations vacant, sign up for an agency, make sure that your curriculum vitae is up to scratch, and you're ready to go to present yourself in a compelling way should an opportunity show itself. I just want to share with you the two upcoming aspects that are really important. On the 4th of September, Mercury moves into an exact trine with Jupiter. Jupiter can be about trade, Mercury can be about commerce, Jupiter can be about overseas business, Mercury can be about the actual transaction or making sure that we deliver the product, 6th house, or service in an efficient way. But that can be quite lucky. So the start of September does provide opportunities. Then on the 6th we have the Cazimi. This is when, as we see it from planet Earth, Mercury is sat inside the Sun because it's an inferior conjunction because of the retrograde, and that's going to amplify the magnificence of Mercury. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have a child on the 6th of September, the chances are that your offspring is going to have a touch of genius about them, but they probably will have quite the eagle eye, which could be challenging at times, but certainly that Cazimi, very, very potent indeed, but it's provocative, it's pushing us to take charge, to not put something off, to take that extra step to be that much more virtuous in whatever part of life we feel that we can improve upon. Some people have very, very clean and tidy homes but might not have the best diet. Other people might have a scruffy home but do a lot of good exercise, but perhaps don't take enough care of perhaps the more psychological dimension of their situation. And of course the positions of Saturn and Neptune are reminding us on this event that we may need to rethink. So good time to make those appointments and to find any way at all that we can just improve our situation by 5, 10, 15%, because it can make a lasting difference. Now I'm going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your sun or your ascendant, to give you a flavour of what you can expect. So Aries, you could find yourself over the next 3 weeks a little bit more picky and irritable about things that perhaps you would normally shrug off. But it's not just because of Mercury retrograde. It is because your ruler Mars is in Virgo too, along with the Sun. You don't really have much choice but to engage with the opportunity to try to rejuvenate and improve some core part of your existence. And of course with Saturn and Neptune in your 12th house, it's possible you might not have an awful lot of enthusiasm to grapple with something. So I think the best thing to do for you over this period is to set yourself a very achievable set of objectives. Don't make it too big, make it pretty earthy, and try to prioritize, say, 5 things that you could do that would make some kind of practical difference to your situation, whether it is looking for another job, whether it is getting a bit more organized at home, taking some more steps, getting out on a bike, going for a swim, whatever it is, try to give yourself some achievable targets and go for it. And just be aware that in terms of work or in terms of your daily existence, there probably are going to be some snags and some picky points made, but just prepare yourself for that by making sure that everything you can influence is running as smoothly as you can possibly make it. So Taurus, for you, the gathering of energy in the sign of Virgo also includes Black Moon Lilith. So having the Sun, Lilith, Mercury and also Mars all in this part of your situation, this is the 5th house. This is about your talents. You have a unique platform here to sparkle around the things that you're good at, but also that give you a sense of pleasure, because that's what the 5th house is about. But we tend to think the sign of Virgo, rightly, is very much about being dutiful, being obligated, making sure that we deal with our responsibilities. But perhaps you have a responsibility to invest time and energy and particularly precision around the things you do enjoy. Because if you're sitting on your hands a little bit and not going for it because you can't quite find the inner spark to make progress, then that could be self-limiting behaviour. Also, the other thing is I feel that there could be some people in your friendship circle who perhaps are not as encouraging as they could be about what can help you to showcase the best of you, whether it's in terms of your personal presentation, your fashion choices, the dates you go on. If there is someone in your world who tends to be just chipping away at your sense of self-esteem, I think you need to set your boundary more firmly on the back of this particular event. And obviously having the moon opposite Uranus in your sign gives you the chance to actually express how you feel. You can be diplomatic, but you don't need to let someone steer what's going on in terms of your passion. So if there's something that you really got a gift for, don't waste it during this period of time. This is a time to revisit that talent and make it work for you more effectively. So Gemini, for you, there's a commonality between your sign and Virgo, and that is that you're both mutable. That means flexible, and of course also ruled by Mercury. But for you, this is an opportunity to definitely think about some home-based schemes with Mars in there as well. This is hustle bustle. If you have been putting off making some kind of adaptation to where you're living, or even moving altogether, I think the next few weeks is a chance to really start to grapple with this more seriously. Now, on the other side of the heavens, Saturn is opposing the position of the Sun, which has just moved earlier today into the sign of Virgo too. And it's possible, especially with Neptune also opposing Mars, that something in your professional situation is actually sapping your emotional happiness and contentedness, which is the fourth house. So it's an ideal opportunity to talk about how you feel. Okay? The problem is Mercury in the fourth house can see us circulating the ideas around our heads and not actually letting the message come out of our mouths. So in other words, we can bottle things up. So the retrograde could be a chance to think carefully about how you do deal with your emotional responses, because clearly your wizardry with language and humour and ability to look at things in lots of different flexible ways usually spellbinds your audience quickly, but also sees you hugely evasive. And that's the mutability I'm talking about. So if there is something you need to really think about seriously in terms of your emotional health, in terms of a family matter, in terms of perhaps working from home, Mercury can be about work from home. This is a great chance to ponder that, but just be aware that there could be some worldly pressures at the moment that quite possibly are proven to be a little bit tiresome. But you need to give yourself the chance to download your emotions, and the best way to do that is to give yourself some peace and tranquility. And of course, because of your love of stimulation, that can be difficult to do, but that is the opportunity this event gives you. So Cancer, your sign is very much associated with feel, whereas the third house is very much about thought, and it's also about quick messages. The interesting thing for your sign in particular is that Virgo is a kind of Gemini energy. House 3 is about those quick communicational moments, but of course the Virgoan host is asking you to be very precise. But I would think the retrograde could see you needing to be careful if you're sending messages, if you're cycling anywhere, very third house, using one of those electric scooters, skating anywhere, very quick, fluid energy, perfect for third house movement, particularly with Mars there. So short journeys could be disrupted over the next few weeks. You could have some technology that may prove to be a little bit unreliable, But it's also a good time to get the back off your PC and give it a good hoover. Because whenever we do that, it's amazing the amount of dust that's built up. So technology, devices, good time to download some apps that can help you to manage your daily existence a little bit better, or to catch up with neighbours, or perhaps even with a sibling that you haven't spoken to for some while. Because the third house, very much to do with that kind of interaction. But the third house is also about our belief systems. Are your belief systems due for a little bit of an upgrade? This Mercury retrograde suggests it's worth at least asking yourself that question. But you can have some bright and bubbly conversations, but of course there can be some cross wires, so it's best not to rush any conversation or journey. With Mars being pretty close to Mercury, impatience is not going to be favourable, particularly with Neptune and Saturn. Neptune applying to Mars and Saturn to the Sun. So if you're journeying anywhere, that does need careful planning for sure. So Leo, because the Sun has moved into Virgo from your sign earlier on in the day of the 23rd, that's asking you to become more conscious of taking any ideas that you've been generating recently and seeing how they're shaping up. Are you about to see that things are becoming more substantive, which can really give you a lot of encouragement? Or are you actually starting to see that some of your ideas may not be quite so practical and may need examining to really make sure that you're not investing more time and energy, or perhaps even money, in something that won't necessarily give you a longer term return? And because Saturn is opposite the Sun and Neptune is opposite Mars, which is about desire, this is not a time to rush any financial decisions, whether it's spending money on things that we enjoy in a daily context, such as, tech or games or music, makeup, those things that really do give us some uplift. I just feel that this is the time to be very precise and conscious of the ins and outs in your situation. If you buy anything online, really scrutinise it to make sure that perhaps you can apply a coupon, get some money off, be a bit thriftier. Is there a way in which you could buy the same product you've been buying more repeatedly, where you can buy it from somewhere else? Is a supplier taking you for granted, perhaps on some subscription you have? Maybe it's to do with one of those video streaming services, maybe it's to do with utilities. Whatever your cost base is, a great time to really drill down into the details and see where you can gain some extra savings and make yourself some extra money that returns to you rather than someone else, because this requires a degree of time and patience, which sometimes, you're a fire sign, you like the big picture, you like the drama. But I have to say that with Venus in your sign in a glorious right angle to Jupiter, I feel that your exuberance and way of going about things, your personality power, could still see you gain something through this Mercury retrograde if you really put your mind to it. So Virgo, the last few months has seen a lot of emphasis on the 12th house of your situation. Suddenly, all you've got left there is Venus. The collective now, the stellium if you like, is all in your sign. The Sun, Black Moon, Lilith, Mercury and Mars. So this gives you a prime opportunity to come into the moment and focus on what's really important to you as an individual. Think of this cluster as rather like an ascendant, the beginning, something that you can initiate now could become very important further down the track. But obviously at any start point we have to take a risk. And it's possible that the rather inverted energies that have been going on the last few months have sapped you a little bit, or some of your ideas have just been cruising along. You've not quite been able to find the time or the traction in order to really get going with them. But if you've got something that you're really excited about, this is definitely the time to focus on it, but you just need to know there's no guarantee that actually will come to anything more substantial and lasting. But if we never venture into any new territory, we'd never create anything new. So if we look at any fresh approach, very often, probably 70% of them don't make the light of day, if you like. So give yourself the encouragement to really believe in what's important to you, but also be realistic that you will have to sustain the effort to get the result. And it may be by experimenting, you will find out some things you don't know at the outset, which may mean that you flex, change, do something slightly different, but the lessons that you learn will still prove to be absolutely valuable to you. But the one thing I'd say to you is just don't expect anyone close to you to be particularly applauding you for this new approach, because they may prefer the status quo as it has been. So Libra, for you, the collection of energy in the sign of Virgo is house 12. This is reflective. Can be a little bit withdrawn. When Mercury is in house 12, we may feel that other people don't really want to be in touch with us. We can become much more hypersensitive, perhaps even to the point of almost looking for rejections. So with the retrograde, I do feel that that's going to be amplified. So if there are any relationships in your situation, but particularly I think at work, where trust is a little bit on the thin side, I think the next few weeks could be a little bit challenging. However much you want to tease into the open how people are feeling, they may be reluctant to have an open and honest conversation and dialogue. But you still have Venus, your ruler, in a supremely positive location. And despite the fact that Venus at this point is still retrograde, it goes direct on the 4th of September, you can still use your charm and your diplomacy in order to handle this situation. And in a more positive way, if there are some really deep strands, especially to do with your past, and particularly with Mars in the 12th house, past hurts and upsets that you perhaps haven't fully had the time to come to terms with, the next few weeks would really be the perfect opportunity to consider how the impact of these events is still manifesting itself in the here and now. So a very profound period for you is coming up, and I do feel that your physical and emotional energy may feel a little on the low side, but persist, because see this as an opportunity to revisit some potentially painful or sensitive events and try to rinse them out of yourself, because that will be really beneficial. So Scorpio, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a provocative question. Is your friendship circle, your network, a little bit on the stale side? Are there some, solid citizens that are there that, you're very fond of, but not necessarily bringing a lot of sparkle to your situation? I think the next 3 weeks is pushing you to test yourself out to see if you could link up with some fresh energy, because people can come in with the kind of dynamism that can be good for you, particularly with Mars, your traditional ruler, pretty close to Mercury on this event. It's just that the energy of Saturn and Neptune applying across the heavens means that you've got to have the desire to make the change. And because you're a fixed sign, we all have particular rituals and foods and routines that we find comfort in, but because you're a fixed sign, are you applying some of that to that circle of friends, or even to some of your hopes for the future? Are you kind of meandering towards what you'd really like, or are you actually purposefully moving forwards in giant steps in a confident fashion? So if there is perhaps a little bit of staleness around your social interaction, if there are some friends that don't really, they're there because they've just been there a long time, they're not really contributing in the way you really need, this is an area that you can really think about. Also, there may be something that has always been in the back of your mind that really excites you. I don't mean in terms of a big job or a big car or a big house, all the usual kind of stuff that we think is linked to ambition. I'm talking something more of a spiritual aspiration. Is there something that would really excite you? It could be like going on a really long journey, to somewhere far distant. It could be like learning to read music, perhaps learning a craft. If there's something that would really bring a sense of revival and refreshment to your future plans, I would really seriously push yourself to go for that at this stage, even if, because Saturn and Neptune are providing some limitation and resistance, I feel because Mars is very close to this Mercury retrograde, your traditional ruler, you have a window there. You just need to jump through it to seize the opportunity. Big question, Sagittarius. Do you get the respect and acknowledgement you really deserve when it comes to your goals and ambitions? Are people around you really aware of your dedication, for example, around your career? Are they particularly participating or encouraging you with what you're trying to achieve? Or are you unsure about what your exact role should be? After all, we are living in such a fast changing landscape. It wouldn't be a surprise if you did feel a little confused, or the options were many and you're not quite sure which to plump for. So I think Mercury retrograde in the 10th house definitely can see you thinking about these issues. There may also be some home emotional or family demands that make it difficult for you to really concentrate in the way that you might like to fulfill some of your goals and ambitions. So you could find yourself balancing over the next few weeks different demands, whether it's elderly parents, young kids, a limited time, perhaps the distance away from an opportunity. All these things could come up, but also because Mars is pretty close to Mercury's retrograde and in the most dominating part of your situation, if you really want to believe in yourself, you've got to shrug off the more draining impact of Neptune, which is opposite it, and really believe in yourself and go for it and try to seize a prize. But it may require you to do something you're actually very good at, and that's be flexible. And the reason for that is Uranus, because ironically, the 10th house energy is in Virgo, about precision, but Uranus, the planet of change, is for you in house 6, about the processes, rather Virgoan. But that's very much about change, innovation. So if you're prepared to re-educate yourself professionally or go for a different type of position that you have in the past, that flexibility can really work in your favour. But if you have a clear plan, you really believe in yourself and you want to go for it, do so. But I feel that there could be a few unexpected bumps or surprises that you may have to deal with. But if you really feel that you're not getting that recognition, the best way to visualize getting it and ultimately getting it is to shrug off all the doubts and not necessarily look for that acknowledgement, and just focus on what you feel your worth is and creating the reality that matches your expectations. So Capricorn, have you had a break this year? Have you been able to have a little bit of freedom, independence, space? Not easy necessarily if you've got big demands, but even over the next 3 weeks, if you just change some part of your normal pattern and brought in just a slice of spontaneity, it really would do you such a lot of good. Because if you do feel too closed in and limited, that actually is going to be a little bit more to deal with than usual. Now, you're a sign that takes on challenges patiently, without fuss, just deals with things, chips away until you get to where you need to go. But sometimes it is important to have a little bit of fun, and I feel that with Uranus and Jupiter angling in to this event as it begins in your 5th house of pleasures, going away with a group of friends for some kind of day trip, perhaps checking out some courses online or learning some new some new ways of thinking about life. All of these things can very much refresh the way the status quo is. But you could also find over the next few weeks that if you are heading off somewhere, you do take the opportunity to go somewhere, it won't necessarily all go tickety-boo. And of course, we know this happens with Mercury retrograde. So whether it's a technical glitch with booking, the flight, the ferry, the coach, whatever it is, just prepare yourself that that is a possibility. But for you personally, do try to set up the chance for you to do something that really can bring some ventilation and air, despite the earthiness of the position of Mercury, but to do something that brings some passion into your situation. Don't feel that you have to just be on that treadmill, because just totally being on the treadmill is not so good for you at this time. So Aquarius, we can look at the 8th house where Mercury retrogrades for you in terms of its practical dimension or more of its spiritual dimension. In terms of the spiritual dimension, the 8th house where Mercury is going to help you to dive deep, to really get beneath the surface, to probe. It doesn't matter what people are telling you, particularly with Venus in your 7th house, because especially with its square to Jupiter, someone may be quite happy to tell you exactly what you want to hear. But Mercury retrograding in the 8th house can help you to don your detective Mac and really pull up the collar and just look around, see who's following you, but then analyze the evidence, and that will help you to get the subtext of what someone really means. So that's an opportunity for you. In terms of the more mystical dimension, the 8th house can be to do with a fascination with any esoteric strand. So you could find yourself engaging more with different forms of divination, not just astrology. But then the more practical dimension can be about shared resources, can be about who we bank with, any insurance policies we have, pensions, all these kind of things. And obviously with the retrograde, there is the potential for mixed signals, crossed wires and so forth and so on. And Saturn since March has been making it financially tough because it's been really tightening up the pressure on your second solar house. And, you know, that is something that needs to be dealt with. It needs to be grappled with, because although Saturn is your co-ruler, as it goes through each of its signs in its journey, wherever we are at that time, it will scrutinize us. It could almost be a song by the Stones, "Scrutinize Me." So Saturn, for us Aquarius people, is scrutinizing us, but particularly around our core values, around our sense of worth, and around our everyday finance. So Mercury, Mars and the Sun, all on the opposite side of the heavens, suggest a little bit of balance in the books, the two of coins type of energy, I feel. But what you will learn over the next 3 weeks, psychologically and financially, will really prepare you to emerge from this in a much stronger position, and with the strategies to approach things in a fresh way, particularly with your modern ruler Uranus's help. So Pisces, Mercury goes retrograde in the house of relating, partnerships, where we try to find that midpoint between our needs and the needs of others, where we need to listen. So all sorts of shared conversations will need care over the next 3 weeks. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But also be aware, because Mars is there, but in an opposition with Neptune in your sign, just at the moment when you could get feisty and set your boundary about something that you feel is frustrating, where people aren't actually responding in the way you would like, it could be the information you base your response on is actually not right, because Neptune can distort. And then Saturn, also in your sign, is applying to the Sun in your 7th house. So just be aware that any frustration that's really been developing around how you feel that you collectively relate to everyone, that really could be peaking up over the next few weeks. So it would be easy to let that sense of injustice really influence your approach to how you're interacting with others. So A degree of patience is going to be needed, understanding that your own physical vitality may be a bit on the low side, that maybe other people haven't been understanding or looking into your situation in the way that you've really wanted or needed. But this is not a time to make instant demands, it's a time to negotiate. And the more that you can skillfully get the flow of dialogue going, despite Mercury's retrograde, the more each side, your needs, their needs, becomes at some level a bit clearer. You might not get someone who means a lot to you, who's finding it difficult to understand where you're coming from. You know, maybe the classic scenario where, you know, you really fancy someone, everything's cooking on gas apart from that little bit of emotional simpatico and understanding. Hugely frustrating. Or it could be that you do really get on and they really, you know, are someone that you love, but maybe their attitude to other parts of your shared existence isn't quite what you want. Maybe struggle a little bit with getting a job or taking responsibility, childcare, looking after elderly parents. If you feel you're doing all these things on your own, it can create quite a lot of resentment. The other area, I think, is, you know, if you are thinking about going into any kind of partnership of any kind, whether it's business or with some other agency, just be aware of making clear what you need from the situations, but also being really understanding of what's expected from you. So a time to really work at that interaction that goes back and forwards. If you did meet someone, don't instantly think, I can't get into a relationship with this person, Mercury's retrograde, it's bound to fail. If that's how you approach it, well, you're obviously increasing the level of potential percentage of failure than if you go into it thinking, look, Mercury retrograde's a time when we're being asked to think, because obviously it's about thoughts, and relate, 7th house, very Libran, because it's your opposite sign, in a precise way, Virgo, so we listen carefully to what's discussed, we're not distracted, and giving someone our full attention, it could be a really good thing to do. So there are things we can learn and gain from this. So I'm a firm believer that things can be put right under Mercury retrograde, as well as cause issues. I think it's a bit of 50-50, and it is a lot to do with our mental approach. So around relationships in general, that's where the work is, but that's where the opportunity is too. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me for this Mercury retrograde special. Please like, share, comment, or subscribe.